Hello everyone, this is part 29 of What If Naruto Was Trained by the Kyuubi, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Chaos, bloody chaos, that could be the only way to describe the current battle. Blood flowed like water across the shattered earth, F was cut, burned, melted, torn, limbs and boss thrown about the once green clearing. Bones broke and crunched underneath the weight of the stampedes of still fighting boss. Morals, honor, and beliefs, all were crushed and laid to waste underneath the sheer magnitude behind the meaning this battle represented for all the elemental nations. Despite the battle already lasting for over an hour, a clear winner could not be determined. Both sides took heavy losses, and yet it seemed that neither was willing to give up until the last man and woman on their side was S. And for what the winner of this battle would receive at the end was considered well worth the S that every single shinobi fighting that day would make. As the battle had progressed in time, the tactical strategies that both sides had tried to implement in the beginning quickly crumbled when the overwhelming fact of a battle of this magnitude couldn't be won with strategies like a chess game, but from the sheer will to survive being stronger than that of the enemy. Because of this and the nature of the fighting, many battalions of shinobi diverged from the main units and picked up fights in multiple areas within the battlefield. With the Uzumakis, UG, these bastards just won't quit. Valios shouted in annoyance after skewering another enemy only for 3 more to show up to chase them. The Uzumaki matriarch and her children had separated from the main army to deal with the enemy on their own terms. However, they bit off more than they could chew when they had been surrounded a detachment of over 200 shinobi, after killing a small battalion of their comrades. After a grueling battle that took many of their enemies' lives as well as taking several large blows themselves, including Kyoshiro losing his left arm to a windmill shuriken, they were down to the last 50 Chunin and Junin. The family of 4 was currently in shambles as they continued to flee from their pursuers. Even Kushina, who was on par with the Sannin, just couldn't keep up with the sheer number of shinobi attacking him at once while also protecting her children when needed. And in truth, there were several times when the group would have lost their lives had Kyoshiro not used his most powerful TSLE layered genjutsu to give them enough time to escape and recuperate from the never-ending wave of enemies. Kyoshiro-kun, how is your arm? Kushina asked as they jumped through the trees, looking at her youngest child whose bloody sleeve sped with the crimson liquid. Slightly better, Ka-san. The bleeding has slowed considerably since we put the tourniquet on. He answered in slight pain with the shabby tourniquet made out of his belt wrapped around his upper arm. We need to stop running and deal with them so we can get him some help. Valios suggested harshly, only to have Kushina shoot down the same idea for a 5th time. I've already said that we can't risk that. If we are to attack them, we must find a sufficient spot to ambush them in. The matriarch shot back. We have to do something, Ka-san. Kasumi argued in a concerned voice while looking at her youngest brother, seeing that he was sweating heavily, more likely than not from blood loss. Suddenly the family stopped on a tree, and brandished weapons, while turning their backs to one another in a circle. The next moment a group of enemy shinobi appeared in front of them, all Junin by their attire. Seems they weren't lying, any Teiku. One of the Junins said with a sadistic smile while looking at the man in the middle who brandished an Iwa headband. Seems so. The built man's gruff voice answered, before his eyes zeroed in on Kushina. Oh, and what's this? They failed to mention that Uzumaki Kushina. One of the 4 generals, leader of the Uzumaki clan, but most importantly, widow of Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage. Konoha's Yellow Flash was among the ones they were pursuing. He announced, before his emotionless expression turned to one of a happy psychotic. And soon to be slave of every Iwa shinobi in Earth Country as reparations for what her husband did to us. He stated with sadistic pleasure, making the family narrow their eyes. And you wonder why Minato-kun killed so many of you, other than the fact we were at war. Kushina shot back viciously. Suddenly the shinobi who had been following the family appeared surrounding the group at nearly every angle, allowing for no more escapes. Sure, we were at war, I'd be a hypocrite after what I've done to your army to say he was an evil man for killing us during wartime. Quote. The man retorted, before his eyes darkened. Quote. However, there is no excuse on just how he killed them. He said, my comrades, said my Nay-san. He finished with a sorrowful roar, before snapping his fingers, and all the shinobi around immediately began hand-sealing. Any last words before we fry your kids? Unfortunately, I'm not sure if you'll survive too, but if you do, you'll simply become a slave, so I suppose S would be giving you some slight mercy. Because we certainly will not when we are you until your L is so rotten that no even a lowly dog would want to F you, let alone a man. He spoke, his voice and words so cold even some of his own men thought B had become some kind of demon. The only response from the matriarch as well as her children was to launch a hail of shuriken and kunai at the surrounding ceiling shinobi. Unfortunately, they were only able to get several with the assault, whom fell down to the forest floor below. The Uzumaki family realized that no plan, no jutsu, no special blood limit would get them out of this. There were far too many of them and had too little chakra to do much of anything. All they could really do now was take as many of these bastards down with them as possible. No, that was a lie. There was one avenue that they still had, however Kasumi refused to take it no matter how badly she wished to. Haraishin, the Namikaze clan's sole ability to travel from one point to another using seals in a matter of milliseconds. A seal which was inscribed on the special three-pronged kunai that she had been fingering behind her back ever since she and her family began to flee. She repeatedly questioned on whether she should use it to save her family or not. She tussled with the notion of her family finding out about it and the repercussions of that decision. But the final decision came when she remembered the promise she shared with her brother the day he gave it to her. The promise of never letting anyone, especially her family, find out about it. And even with the sanctions he gave her to use it, she'd be breaking her promise to him despite that, and after all she had said about him and done to him, she couldn't face herself for breaking that promise even if she SD in the process. She eased the kunai back into her pouch, after she let the shuriken and kunai fly before, and readied herself for the consequences of her final decision. You want our last words? Kushina finally asked rhetorically before smiling viciously. Kids, tell him, she ordered, her children soon understanding before smiling evilly, brandishing a kunai in each hand. Uzumakis. Kasumi shouted. Quote. Never. Valios shouted. Quote. Give. Kyoshiro shouted. Quote. Up. Kushina finished up unsheathing Zenu no Ikimi, touch of the Almighty, before all four of them jumped up at the surrounding shinobi, in one final strike. TSH, fools. The Uwa Junin said to himself before snapping his fingers again, the shinobi beginning to call are their Kaiten Jutsu, but a new voice broke through interrupting them. Doton, Chuga Sentu, Earth Style, Piercing Fang Spire. The voice shouted. Suddenly large cracking sounds resounded in the entire area, the sound reminiscent of trees tearing in half. Then in the direction the Iwa Junin faced, a large object barreled towards him with the shinobi facing away from it having no idea. The object sped through the trees as well as several unsuspecting Kiko shinobi, scattering bits and pieces of tree as well as human blood, and limbs throughout the area. The Iwa Junin and those around him jumped into the air noticing that the object shot straight underneath the still mid-air Uzumakis and aimed directly towards them. As the object passed them they were able to get a good enough look at what it was. Unfortunately the object wasn't in any discernible shape, it was much like a miniature spinning tornado, however protruding from the tornado seemed to be razor-sharp rocks which spin independently from the tornado itself. To the Iwa shinobi the attack reminded him of a multi-bladed blender, where the tornado was the main spinning blade, and the rocks were extra blades that were meant to either eviscerate what the tornado caught even more, or to damage whatever was able to barely escape. The Iwa Junin landed sideways on a tree when the tornado passed, and looked back at the devastation it caused. He couldn't help but be slightly sickened even to his own standards at the bloody scene he looked upon. At least 20 of the 50 Junin that had just been present, were now missing, but not in the fact that they landed too far to see, but in the sense that nothing but splatters pools of blood, along with their completely shredded garb, were left of those men. The jutsu that was just used really did resemble a blender, where it completely turned whomever was attacked by it into nothing but a fine mesh of blood, guts, and cloths. You enjoy my handiwork, a sadistic feminine voice called out to them from behind. The Iwa shinobi, his comrades, as well as the surprised Uzumaki family, turned to the voice to find a blood-drenched Inuzuka Hana standing sideways along a tree with her arms crossed and a satisfied smile on her lips. No. But don't worry, because we'll enjoy ours when we carve every single one of those men's names into your F while we rearrange your L using a serrated kunai. The Iwa man growled out. Hana just smirked before jumping from the tree to a closer proximity of the group. Gomen, but Oto already tried that and failed. She shot back before chuckling grimly. They actually thought they could do that with such tiny SS, it was pathetic really. She joked, making several Oto shinobi who had heard of what occurred at the complex years ago look on in slight fear. Don't worry, we'll make sure to do it right this time. The Iwa shinobi promised. We'll see. Hana retorted before handsealing. Quote. Doton, Sabaku Arashi, Earth Style, Desert Storm. She yelled out. A pregnant pause occurred before from the forest floor a barrage of kunai-like rocks shot up targeting the remaining men. Several were unable to find cover soon enough and the rocks literally shoot through their boss from below, causing streams of blood to fall from the sky as they continued to ascend to the skies after exiting the now fallen corpses. "UB," one of the Junins shouted. "Well, I am an Inuzuka." Hana retorted jokingly, seeing the 25 remaining shinobi emerge from the trees. "Fine then, we'll treat you like one when we capture you, then you won't be smiling." At that the shinobi went on the offensive, jumping out at her. She smiled before brandishing the two kodaki, short swords, and launched herself at them as well. The Uzumaki family could only watch while they recovered their chakra as Hana fought off the 25 men. And were surprised that she was holding her own well despite the odds, considering that 3 years ago she was only considered a chunin by Konoha standards and was even a veterinarian. Not even a full-time shinobi. Yet here she was fighting off not only one but over 2 dozen Junin, all the while using a rare weapon for a shinobi with a power and grace that belied the skills of a master. After nearly 10 minutes of the Kenjutsu out off taijutsu fighting between the two groups, the 10 remaining Kiko Junin and a panting, bleeding Hana separated. "Well, you're pretty scared girl, I'll give you that," the Iwa Junin from before complimented while panting slightly. "However, this is a shinobi fight, isn't it?" he questioned, making Hana quirk an eyebrow before he snapped his fingers. The moment he did, 5 of his comrades disappeared from their positions, making Hana and the Uzumaki family look around. Kushina was the first one to realize the man's plan and unsheathed her Zenu, swinging it just in time to cut one of the approaching shinobi in half, spraying blood in a horizontal arc. Unfortunately, she was only able to get one of shinobi in her swing, while 3 were able to overpower her still exhausted children, with the last grabbing her wrist while twisting it to cause her to drop the sword, and get her in a grapple hold with a kunai pressed against her jugular, her children in similar positions. Seeing the new situation, Hana growled at the Junin that ordered the assault, while he just smirked on smugly. "I can see from your reaction you know exactly the position you are in right now. That is if you want these 4 to live." He spoke up, making her growl even louder. "Coward," Kushina barked, the kunai digging into her mare. "Call me what you will, but history is written by the winners, as such your opinions don't matter. Besides, we as shinobi, our profession is deception and dishonesty, since when are the battles we fight as one any different?" He answered back with a shrug. At his answer, Hana lifted her arms, but was stopped by the man's voice. "RRR." He spoke up, wagging his pointer finger in a negative fashion at her. "Unless you want these 4 to decorate this beautiful forest with their blood, I suggest you don't move again," he threatened. Hana kept her hands where they were and just looked at the man's in the eyes, her own shining with an icy coldness. "And," she started emotionlessly, "what makes you think I should care about them?" she questioned, making the man arch a brow before she continued. "I'm the mate of Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, the firstborn to one Uzumaki Kushina. The very same Uzumaki Kushina who banished him when he was only a boy. Who later taught her new children the art of shinobi for one main reason, King Naruto. So do you really think that I care about what happens to the family that has done all that to the man I love?" she inquired, her tone staying the same way, denoting no lie. Every one of them who heard her, the Uzumaki family included, looked on with shock and worry in their expressions. The Uzumaki family, because if Hana was speaking the truth, she had basically washed her hands of them the moment she intervened, and couldn't have cared less if they sd. while their enemies had that reaction because their trump card just backfired, since the Snow Kunoichi apparently hadn't come to save the family exclusively but for another reason entirely. I see, so this is how the new hidden village operates. The Iwa Junin mused almost whimsically. Believe what you will. Hana shot back before lifting her hands again and began handsealing. The Junin's eyes widened. Wait, if you don't stop we really will K them. He shouted, and was stunned when she didn't slow down at all. She really wasn't kidding. She really will let them S. He thought. Hana finished handsealing, ignoring the warning, before arching her hands and face towards the canopy of the trees and took a deep breath. Kaiten, Ryusei Enku, fire style, meteor flame. She said, letting the breath out, as a stream of fire shot from her mouth. The onlookers watched in confusion as Hana let loose her jutsu high into the sky past the treetops instead of at him, with all wondering why. What the hell was that? Your jutsu wasn't even aimed at us. The Junin shouted, almost amused at her actions, but began to question his words when after her jutsu ended she had a superior smirk across her face. You're right, it wasn't. She agreed amusedly. The next moment all of them looked up to see what she meant, when they all looked on in shock once again as they saw a large group of flames coming at them. She used her Kaiten jutsu to ignite her Sabaku Arashi jutsu that began to descend from the sky. He thought in surprise. With no time to run, the ignited kunai-like rocks descending from the sky like comets right towards her enemies. A second later the flaming rocks rained down upon the Kiko shinobi, melting and cutting into searing through solid bone, boiling the very blood of the shinobi the jutsu touched. Unholy screams of agony resounded through the area as the shinobi writhed in pain, feeling the intense heat burn their skin and innards as they bled profusely from the gaping wounds despite the cauterizing effects of the flames. All of the shinobi had been skewered through, however the Uzumaki family was left surprisingly untouched. All but the vocal Iwa Junin had lost their balance and fell from the tree branches they stood on, falling down to the earth as blood littered the air while doing so. The smell of burnt and fresh blood completely filling the area. Hana herself, a minute after the boss fell, jumped towards the Iwa Junin's body, and simply waited for him to move. She knew from her many battles as a shinobi that people like him would refuse to just out of annoying stubbornness. Thankfully her patience didn't have to wait very long before she saw him getting up and standing in a hunched-over position, his legs shaking uncontrollably either by the pain, or the blood loss she didn't know nor care. You Fing B. He cursed, however it only came out as a strangled whisper. We've already gone through this, and besides can you really expect me to simply give myself up, especially after what you said you'd do to me? She questioned, though not expecting an answer, and simply threw one of her kunai at his feet. I'll do the honorable thing and allow you one final move before you she offered. The man looked at her in the eyes, and saw no hidden lie, before painfully bending over and picked up the kunai, holding it with both hands since he couldn't feel either one very well anymore. He chanced one more look at Hana before his legs tensed and shot forward with what little chakra and life he had left, deciding that if he really was going down he would at least bring this bee with him. The Uzumaki family just watched this exchange with interest. They watched as Hana continued to stare at the charging man coolly, before she put her arms behind her back and swiftly pulled out her two kodaki once more in an upside-down GS. The young Inuzuka then disappeared while the man still charged towards where she just was, who also seemed to not notice her missing from his sights until it was too late. The next moment the Uzumaki family noticed Hana reappear on the other side of the tree limb, her arms crossed across her chest with her blades pointing forward with blood sping off the blades. When the family looked back towards the man, they noticed that the only thing still on the tree limb was his torso and an engorging pool of his own blood, which began to rain down the sides of the branch towards the reddening earth below. Both his arms, legs and head were missing from his body, and since they could not locate them, assumed they fell over the side of the branch much like his blood began to do. Hey AI, fast. Kushina thought after seeing Hana's movement while King the Iwa Junin. However she couldn't see the actual sword swings, only the flashes of light they created. Turning their attention back to Hana, they saw her slashing her kodaki several times to get the blood off before reshithing him upon her lower back. Once she finished with that she strolled up to the family almost seeming as if she hadn't just killed off 30 shinobi. You four all right? She questioned, however her tone was anything but warm, which slightly confused the family. Hi. Kyoshiro-kun just needs medical attention. Everyone else could just use some rest. Kushina answered. Very well, let's head back. Wait, Kushina ordered, slightly agitated, making Hana quirk an eyebrow. Just what the hell was all that? She questioned. What do you mean? What I mean is, all of that. Kushina shouted, pointing towards the demolished, bloody and corpse-ridden forest. It's war. Hana answered bluntly. Don't give me a chewed. I know more about war than you could ever imagine. Aside from that, I'm also your superior while you're fighting for us in this war. And that wasn't what I was talking about. The king I can understand. However, your words and actions are what I want to be explained. She explained harshly. Hana's eyes narrowed menacingly. No one but those I trust may ever command me to do anything, Kushina-san. Hana growled out. As for my words and actions, what is there to not understand? I simply said and did what I needed to do, to get the situation under my control. Kushina was now the one to narrow her eyes. And that whole speech about leaving us to rot was what? Strategy? She accused. Hi. But at the same time no. Hana answered. Quote. I said what I said to make them question their own strategy they thought would work against me. However, what I said to them was anything but a lie. The Uzumaki's sons Kasumi narrowed their eyes at the Yuki Kunoiki. So, what? You'd have let us s. Valios accused, appalled at Hana's actions. Hi, you be. He shouted back immediately. Perhaps. However, do not be disillusioned at the notion that I saved you. Because that is the farthest thing from the truth of the matter. I simply came to kill the enemy, whether you lived or SD was of no concern of mine, for the exact reasons I stated to that Junin. Besides, it's not my place to kill you or any Uzumaki. That right solely belongs to Naru-kun should he ever feel compelled to get his rightful vengeance upon you. She answered. Valios couldn't stand her explanation and was about to lunge at her, but a grip on his shoulder prevented him from moving. When he looked up, he saw that the arm belonged to his mother, who simply shook her head. I understand. Kushina answered, who in fact really did, but it didn't mean she had to like it, which she clearly didn't. We should go before more of them show up, she suggested. Nei-chan. A masculine voice called out from the tree line behind them. Hana and the group turned to see Kiba, Chum, and a squad of several Junin enter the area, whom stopped on a branch next to them and surveyed the area. Damn, looks like a war zone, he said, impressed after a surprised whistle at seeing the destruction and death. You can thank her for that, Valios said with a bitter anger, making Kiba quirk a brow, before looking back at Hana. Nei-chan, you did this. Hi. I was completely right in realizing just how much stronger she had gotten in these 3 years. Chum thought in awe and pride after seeing the battlefield which apparently her daughter created all on her own. Just how strong are you? Kiba questioned with hidden excitement and slight jealousy, after learning his sister had been the one to wreak all this havoc. Now he could certainly admit that she could back up that black shirt she loved to wear that said, "Can't touch this, Alpha, B." Hana just smiled warmly at her brother, before ruffling his hair slightly, her mood doing a complete 180 compared to when she was speaking to Kushina and Valios. Gomen Ototo. Yuki's shinobi standards and rankings are slightly askew compared to the greater nations. She explained, however got questioning looks from everyone. Though she expected it much. Let's just say that, any single genin from Snow could beat a 3-man genin squad from any other nation with little trouble unless Kekkei Genkai are involved. Our premiere in the Chunin exams should be proof enough of that. With that in mind, I'm only ranked as a Tokubutsu Junin in Yuki. But to your standards I'm probably high Junin level in ability. She explained, getting dinner plate-sized eyes as reactions, mainly from her family and the few Junin from Konoha. Damn. Those 3 years with Naruto-Nisan made you really strong, NE. I'm kinda jealous, he admitted with a slight pout, making Chum and Hana chuckle lightly, before getting his hair ruffled again. No worries, Squirt, I'm sure Naru-kun would be more than happy to supervise your training if you ever come down to Snow Country. Hana reassured him, making him smile lightly, before everyone heard a loud snort. Everyone turned towards the person, before he noticed all eyes were on him and spoke up. What? I just find it funny that you only got as strong as you did with the demon's help, instead of obtaining the strength you now have on your own. Valios answered with a shrug, getting several growls in anger, before a blast of ki shot out from Hana specifically. Kushina-san. I highly suggest you have him watch his tongue when around myself or any other shinobi from Yuki. I may be willing to stop myself from King and Uzumaki for Naru-kun. But I cannot speak for my comrades allowing you the same courtesy. Hana spoke through gritted teeth, releasing her ki when Kushina nodded in affirmation. Inuzuka-san. Kasumi, who up until that point was quite called out, making Hana look at her. Where is he and your comrades now? Hana turned her back to Kasumi. She in truth knew all about the bond Naruto and she had made, but she couldn't ask appropriately with Kasumi's family there. They each have their own personal missions to take care of in this war, and are completing them as we speak. She answered. As for Naru-kun himself, he is dealing with a large thorn who's wedged itself deeply into several of his friends and loved ones' sides. She finished cryptically. I see, she whispered before stepping back, mentally frowning. Knowing Naruto as well as she has had the privileged, her words meant he was going after Orochimaru. We should rendezvous with the rest of the army. Chum suggested, getting nods from everyone. The group took one last look around the area, before launching off towards the way they came. Kasumi was still worried about her brother, but was brought out of her musings when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Hana looking at her with a small, almost unnoticeable smile, however that one expression put much of Kasumi's worries at ease. Unfortunately, someone had noticed the smile out of the corner of their eyes and simply filed the interaction away for later. With Yugito, Kumo, that singular word meant a lot to the feline-looking woman who stood drenched in blood while staring down 5 Kumo shinobi as dozens of their comrades littered the ground behind her. To her it meant hate, anger, sadness, loneliness, ignorance, fear, pain. Despite all that, it also meant one other thing. Home, or as far as home can be expressed as a place to keep you protected from the elements of nature. Thankfully, however, that part of her life was far behind her. Kumo was far behind her, now that she had her mother back, a village that respected her as a shinobi and jinchuriki as well as the love of a good, honest, and in her opinion, man. However, there was one thing that she hadn't wanted to leave behind that day 3 years ago, and that thing was currently staring right back at her on this bloody battlefield. Akiko-chan, she spoke, almost in a whisper, while staring at her younger friend who now adorned a Chunin vest. Yugito-chan. She acknowledged with surprisingly little emotion. This isn't how I wanted to meet you again after 3 years. The jade-eyed woman admitted with a hint of guilt. Then you shouldn't have come back to fight in this war on the wrong side. You shouldn't have abandoned Kumo, you shouldn't have left me. Akiko retorted, her own voice taking on both a hint of sadness and anger, making her friend look away in shame. But you know why I left that place. She explained, getting a sympathetic look from her friend. I know probably better than anyone why you left. And as your friend I'm happy that you left, and apparently found a place that treats you better than Kumo ever did. But as a Kumo kunoiki I can't forgive you for deserting us like you did, and after finally finding you I have a duty to my village to bring you back. She retorted, getting into a fighting stance, her other 4 comrades doing the same soon after, her actions making Yugito frown. So you won't let me just pass to do what I've come here to do? The blonde asked, with hope that her friend would allow her an unobstructed path. As your friend I'd be more than happy to allow you to go peaceably, however the moment I adorned this headband my personal feelings take a back seat to my loyalty to my village and raikage. She answered firmly, confirming her intentions. I see. She responded in another whisper of disappointment, now getting into her own stance. Then Gamen Akiko-chan, but to complete my mission, I have to defeat you. However, there is one thing I want you to know, you were my best friend in Kumo and for that I will be forever grateful. Silence then reigned on the bloody clearing they stood upon, aside from the battles taking place all around them but far enough away where only the screams of the departed, and metal clashing against metal could be heard. The 2 groups stared down at each other, before they all disappeared from sight, sounds of weapons crashing against each other could be quickly heard. One of the 5 Kumo shinobi was quickly dispatched by a thrown kunai lodging itself in his en while still in midair. The remaining 4 and Yugito landed on opposite sides of the clearing from where they began, before the 4 quickly turned, and began hand-sealing. Raiten, Akatsuki no Utage, lightning style, lightning bolt feast. All but Akiko shouted, before they each threw a kunai into the ground. Erupting from the kunai lightning began to crackle, before the lighting shot forward coursing through the earth. Yugito just looked on in amusement at the simplicity of their attack, especially since all one would need to do is jump to dodge the bolts. That is before she heard Akiko speak, her words making the Nibi container look with widened eyes. Raiten, Gekijurioku, lightning style, slight gravity. The next moment a yellow pulse of light encompassed the area, and Yugito felt like she weighed a ton, nearly falling to the ground had she not caught herself on a knee. She grunted at both the surprise and strain to stay up, before she noticed that the lightning bolts were coming incredibly close to her. Shush has gotten much better, Yugito mentally complimented towards her friend. But so have I, she finished, before beginning to hand seal herself. Doten, Doro Geishi, Earth style, mud overturn. Yugito said before slamming her hands into the ground, and a large slab of earth arose from the ground in a defensive wall in front of her, obscuring the vision of her enemies. The lightning continued its sly course towards Yugito, before the multiple bolts smacked into the earth wall, causing shards of rock to blow off it as the lightning drilled against it. A long minute passed as the two jutsu fought, with the lightning making its way through the earth wall. However, the Kumo shinobi decided to stop the attack for two reasons. One, for expending too much chakra in a single jutsu is just a good way to get yourself killed in a war like this. And second, by now Yugito was probably long gone from behind the wall with how much time it gave her Akiko's gravity jutsu on or not. Search for her, but remember to keep her alive. Reikage-sama will want to talk to her later. Akiko ordered, but before the remaining three could acknowledge her, a strong pulse of ki engulfed the area, a ki that they knew all too well that seemed to originate behind the wrecked slab of earth. Ninpu, Kage Nui, ninja art, shadow sewing. A feral voice called out, before a strange black substance appeared snaking around the still erected earth wall. The black substance shot forward towards the tense Kumo shinobi at a fast pace. Stay away from it, and don't let it touch your shadow. Akiko shouted to her comrades before jumping back with them following, remembering hearing about a similar technique used by Nara Shikamaru in the Chunin exams 3 years ago. Too late, Yugito's voice called out. Immediately after she spoke, the single shadow racing across the ground lifted off the ground before shooting right into the air, before the single shadow divided into 100. The surprise on the Kumo shinobi's faces clearly showed, especially when two of them were skewered in multiple places, making blood rain down, as their boss fell to the ground, their lives dwindling as more blood left them. Akiko and her remaining comrade landed while wincing from the several non-lethal injuries they sustained from the jutsu. That darkness element she gains from Nibi is just as dangerous as ever, and she's been perfecting it. Akiko thought, wondering just what else her old friend had up her sleeve. Just then Akiko felt a presence behind her, but before she could fully turn her head, a splash of blood sprayed across her face. As she continued to turn, her eyes met the eyes of her final comrade, which were open wide in surprise while a kunai stuck out of his a river of blood cascading down his body from the wound. Akiko, seeing this, turned quickly to gaze into the eerily glowing yellow eyes of her friend, and in response jumped back from her spot, only to see her comrade's corpse there when she landed. The second she realized Yugito disappeared, she was about to jump once more, but felt a prick in the back of her and when she tried to move couldn't, her body becoming increasingly numb as the seconds rolled by. I don't want to kill you, Akiko-chan. Yugito's feral voice growled out from behind the prone girl. And with your conviction set, this was the only way I could think of to stop you without seriously hurting or killing you. She explained. Why are you doing this? She questioned, finding only her face being still movable at this point, and saw Yugito walk in front to face her. To take my revenge on those from Kumo who deserve it after what they did to me, and put my Car-san through. She answered coldly, her voice now back to normal, her words keeping back any retort Akiko might have spoken. So you're here to kill everyone from Kumo? No, she answered with a small smile, making Akiko look slightly surprised. I'm here for only one man today, the man whom all my misery started. She explained, getting a now stunned expression from her friend. Why? You want to kill the Reikage? Hi. Because nearly all of the negative events in my life can be traced back to him. Akiko thought about her words, and thought of the many things that occurred in Yugito's life she knew of, and in truth she was right. The Reikage had been the root to almost every single problem the girl had in her life. The expression on her face gave Yugito the answer she failed to say verbally. I see, Akiko finally said, her voice slightly defeated. Have you thought about those still living in Kumo? What our lives will be like if you killed the Raikage? How the village will react for not only losing their leader, but also the pandemonium those bloodthirsty politicians and clan heads will cause while scrambling for the position? She questioned. I'll admit that I mostly decided to come here to kill the bastard that ruined my life for myself. But I also have thought about the repercussions of my actions back in Kumo. And if you ask me, I think that a new leader, even the bloodthirsty politicians or clan heads will be able to do a better job in ruling Kumo and protecting Lightning Country than he ever did. She retorted rather heatedly, making Akiko frown slightly. There really is nothing I can say to change your mind, is there? Gamen, but no, she answered strongly, before hefting her still numb friend in her arms, and jumped towards the forest before placing her against a hidden tree branch. What are you doing? Keeping you out of sight so no one from Konoha gets any ideas. She explained before grabbing another kunai and began to carve a strange symbol into the bark of the tree. Now once all of this nonsense is over, Naru-kun will come by and pick you up to send you back to Kumo safely. She reassured while getting up from her crouched position. You're really going to go through with this? She asked, though it was more of a statement than a question. Hi, she answered before turning her back, now facing her friend. Quote. I hope you decide to come visit Snow Country sometime after all this is over, Akiko-chan. I've missed you. She admitted before disappearing in a cloud of smoke and lightning. Akiko frowned at the spot her friend just was. Good luck, she thought. Despite her loyalties to the Raikage, she still held personal loyalties to her friends and village, to which she honestly did believe would be better off with a new leader than the one currently in power. With Raikage. So, is this all Konoha has to offer? The gruff voice of the Raikage garbed in his cage robes barked sarcastically. The Raikage paced back and forth in front of several kneeling and tied up Konoha shinobi. Those shinobi being the Chunin Kamizuki Izumo, Hagen Kotetsu, Yamanaka Ino, Akamaiki Chuji, and Junin Nara Shikamaru, Sarutobi Asuma. The group had been captured when Kumo reinforcements invaded the defensive lines, giving no time for Shikamaru to make any plans for escape or counterattack. They were now at the mercy of the Lightning General and his vault officers whom stood around them, their katanas already drawn, simply waiting for the signal to end their lives. You say that, and yet who were the ones who've been forced into a stalemate for nearly a year with well over twice the men? Izumo shot back with a smug smirk before being backhanded. You are really in no position to gloat, my friend. The cage responded amusedly, wiping the blood off his hand on Izumo's shirt. Besides, don't think I don't know that the only reasons you've even survived this long is because of that damnable demon you call the Kazekage, and the Uzumaki clan with their Kekkei Genkai. TSH shows what you know. Even without that clan we'd still kick your ass in this war. Kotetsu shouted, earning himself a slap as well. I'll give you Konoha shinobi this, you're loud, obnoxious, and stubborn as all hell. Even when you're in such a position, you still have the gall to mouth off to your executioners. It's called the Wall of Fire, you motherfuck. Izumo started proudly before being cut off mid-sentence when a katana was quickly lodged through his Adam's apple, making blood dribble through his mouth before falling to his side bleeding to death. Izumo. Asuma shouted, surprised that they would kill him so quickly. He thought they'd keep them alive for at least interrogation, but apparently the Raikage had other, more lethal plans for them. You bastard! Kotetsu shouted, as the Raikage nonchalantly checked fingernails for dirt as if he had no care in the world. Let that be a lesson to you, disrespect me and that will be your fate. He answered, pointed to the convulsing, and heavily bleeding Izumo. What do you want with us then? It's clearly not for interrogation, or you wouldn't have killed him off so easily without asking any of your questions. Shikamaru, who had until that point been silent, spoke up. In truth, he had been trying to figure out any plan to get them out of this situation with as little loss of life on their side as possible. Unfortunately, the best plans he could think of left only two of them alive by the end. Oh, a perceptive one, NE. The Lightning leader questioned jokingly, while stepping in front of the Nara heir. Well, it's quite simple. You're right, you aren't here for interrogation, because we don't need any information on you. Orochimaru Dono knows enough of your battle strategies to know the majority of your moves. And any we don't know could easily be counted with our sheer numbers. No. Why I want you is much more simple than that. I simply wish to know, and see the faces of those I and my men will T and K. He explained, before glancing over at Ino, a knowing grin spreading across his face. Well, most of you anyway. He finished, the hidden meaning in his words sounding as clear as day, which made Ino gulp audibly in fear. So you're just a barbarian? Chuji asked, attempting to move so he could get in front of Ino in a protective fashion. This is war. To my enemies I will always be a barbarian. And to my allies I will always be a hero. The only difference is from whose point of view are you looking through. He answered in a sage-like manner. But I'm feeling generous today. After all, your little group did give me some entertainment before you were captured. So I'll leave it up to you what order you'll in, so who should be first? He offered a masochistic smirk on his lips. The group kneeled there as the Raikage stared at each one of them, as if playing a round of Russian roulette with his pea. Each of the Konoha shinobi kept up their emotionless facade as to not play this man's sick little game. Unfortunately, one of them couldn't keep the rage, hatred, and sorrow from their eyes, and the moment their eyes met, the Raikage made the choice for them. The Kage strode up to them and smiled in almost a warm way before speaking. Well, since none of you are willing to play, I'll choose for you. Quote. He stated, before he strode up to Kotetsu. Quote. You were friends with that man, weren't you? He questioned rhetorically. The emotions running though the gaze was answer enough. Very well. I shall release you from the anguish you must be feeling over his death. He paused before grabbing a kodaki from his back. You know you should feel honored. I haven't slain anyone with this sword for over a decade. The craftsmanship is superb, on par with the swords of the 7 swordsmen of the mist and even the legendary demon blade, Sautenkei's, Naruto owns. He complimented while staring at the blade in an appraising manner. Oh, I'm honored all right, Kotetsu answered sarcastically, before spitting in the Raikage's face. Still the ever-strong spirit I see. The Kage answered while wiping the spit from his face. Let's just see how long that spirit lasts. He finished before he walked up to Kotetsu, pressed the blade against his jugular and in a crescent moon arc-esque Kotetsu's N open, his blood already spraying across the green grass. Kotetsu toppled over after several seconds, his skin already turning a bluish hue, as he just continued to bleed out just like his long-time friend next to him. Only a minute later did the poor man finally before the Raikage moved in front of the remaining 4 prisoners looking no worse for the wear after witnessing that. So, who is next? He questioned in a happy tone. Konoha will have your head after this. Asuma threatened with a growl. Gamen, but his head belongs to me, a new voice interrupted, alarming everyone to its presence. Everyone looked around to try to find the speaker, but their only answer was when dozens of spikes of what seemed to be shadows shot out of the Konoha shinobi's combined shadows thanks to their proximity. Shikamaru, knowing this particular jutsu intimately, looked behind him to see another shadow connecting to his comrades, as it led back into the dense forest. With a distraction presenting itself, Asuma grabbed a small knife that he hid away waiting for the perfect time to strike with it. He let his wind chakra into the blade which easily cut through his restraints, before he launched the knife into the end of one of the vault officers still alive after the shadow attack. Who are you? The Kage roared, seeming to ignore Asuma's escape for the apparently more dangerous opponent he now faced, as he swiveled in a circle trying to find them. I'm surprised you've forgotten me so quickly, Raikage-sama. The voice spoke, venom de-sping from its tone when addressing the lightning leader. After all, you've trained me since I was 12 years old to be Kumo's own personal weapon. Threatening my Car-san's life should I ever step over the line with you or anyone in that village. The voice continued on, its words striking a chord in the middle-aged man making him go wide-eyed. Yugito, he said unsure, before to both his and the now freed Konoha shinobi's surprise she appeared right in front of the man, her arm seed back before letting it fly into his face sending him careening several yards across the ground with a loud grunt of pain, and a crack of bone that was obviously the sound of his nose breaking. Hi, she confirming, before she looked back at the remaining shinobi. Go back to the army and get people back here to deal with the boss. She ordered. What do you mean, you want us to leave? Ino questioned not only at this woman's words but her authority to order her when she obviously wasn't even a shinobi from their army. Hi, that's exactly what I'm saying. And what about him? Asuma asked, not liking the position he was in, especially since the woman speaking was a now known Jinchuriki, Even after all these years, his stigma of those with demon chakra never changed. Leave him to me, Yugito assured with no hesitation. You expect us to leave you here to fight and subdue a cage, all alone? Ino questioned, now thinking this girl was not only arrogant but insane. Ino, you should already know how strong she is from the preliminary matches all those years ago, as well as what she contains. If any one of us could do this, it would be her. Shikamaru answered for the blonde container, remembering her match and strength quite well. Fine, do what you want, but don't blame me if you end up S or S. Ino, HMing while crossing her arms in defeat. I won't, Yugito answered bluntly. Asuma-sensei, we should leave and get some people to clean up these boss. Shikamaru suggested. Hi. The older man agreed, taking one last look at Yugito. Let's go and meet with the others, he ordered, getting nods from his old team before they all jumped away into the forest. So now it's just you and me, the Raikage said mirthfully as he wiped the blood from his mouth after the sucker punch he received. You know, I'll forget what happened these past 3 years if you repent for your actions, he offered, getting a quirked eyebrow from the blonde. Repent? She questioned with a raised brow. He smirked. Hi. All you have to do is get on your hands and knees and beg for forgiveness for your selfishness and stupidity for leaving Kumo and my side, he elaborated. Yugito stared at him for a few good seconds before she burst out laughing. You want me to laugh, get on my hands and laugh knees and beg for your laugh forgiveness? She questioned through her laughter, her response making the Raikage frown. Compared to what I could do to you if you were to continue this silly rebellion, I'd have to say my offer is pretty generous, he shot, a hint of anger in his voice. Her laughing immediately SD after he finished speaking, her face went from smiling to an emotionless one. Her emerald eyes housing a glint of death he had never seen before, which made him unconsciously shiver. Compared to what I could do to you now, you should be the one on your hands and knees begging me to spare your miserable life, not that I would regardless, she answered. The Raikage looked in the eyes of his old subordinate once more, and saw no bluff in her words. If they really continued this, she really believed she could beat him. If not for what she was, he would have actually laughed at her. I see, so you really came back only to K me? He questioned, getting a small but confident nod. Then I'll just have to beat you to within an inch of your life and drag you and your whore of a Car-san back to Kumo, where you belong, he finished, purposely striking one of the few nerves that really got to Yugito. Unfortunately for him, he didn't know just how effective the barb was, that is until he felt an incredible force of ki flood the area, and a purple aura begin to engulf Yugito. That was a foolish mistake on your part, Yugito spoke, her voice sounding more animalistic than human, before she began to quickly handseal. Yamaton, Fuen Kokuyu, darkness style, eternal damnation. She spoke after her hand seals finished. The Raikage got into a fighting stance when she spoke her jutsu, and tensed when he saw her shadow extend outward. However, he arched a brow when the shadow swung back behind its owner before splitting off in 6 different directions. His silent question about her plan was quickly answered when the shadows connected with the shadows of the 6 S-men still lying around the field. The moment the shadows connected the S-boss, they began to twitch and move, making the Raikage go wide-eyed. He had only heard legends of the power of the darkness element, but to see its ultimate mastery actually used was quite nerve-wracking. The Raikage could only look on in morbid curiosity as the boss cracked and twisted, seeming to get used to their boss once more. After several moments, all 4 of the vault officers and the 2 Konoha Chunins stood straight and tall as if they hadn't SD, each one brandishing their weapons, whether it be simple kunai to the vault-issued katana. It's ironic, really, to be hunted by your own men, Yugito taunted with an evil grin, before waving her hand lazily towards him, her 6 puppets disappearing immediately afterwards. The Raikage wasn't even given a chance to retort to her jab, and barely enough other than to grab 2 kunai in each hand before he was thrust into a 6-on-1 kenjutsu out-off taijutsu match between 4 of his former subordinates, and 2 enemy shinobi. As the fighting rolled on, with both sides being evenly matched surprisingly, it seemed that neither side could gain ground for long. The Raikage was clearly stronger than the 6, however the 6 worked as a single unit because Yugito herself was the one controlling them. The Raikage couldn't help but constantly look towards Yugito, who since the beginning of the fighting simply stood back and watched him fight, that same evil smile on her lips as her eyes glowed that eerie yellow glow. I've underestimated his abilities with weapons, but then again not many from Kumo have ever seen him actually fight since he became Raikage, so it was a gamble on my part. Yugito mused as she continued to watch the stalemate. Quote, I don't even think this battle would be a contest if it had only been the two Konoha shinobi. It seems that those Vault members were some of his best men, well my men. She concluded. Yugito. The Raikage shouted while ducking under a sword swipe. Do you really believe? He huffed out, slashing Izumo across the chest, but the body didn't falter. That these things could beat me alone. He finished, after drop-kicking another Vault member in the face before vaulting off and away from them. The moment the Raikage landed, he was surprised to find that the puppets she had made were already surrounding him in a circle, looking none worse for the wear even after the beating he gave them. In response, Yugito strode close to the small circle that encased her old boss, her expression darkening only slightly before speaking. It was a gamble, I'll admit, but since I've never seen you fight, I used them to test you and if possible KO you. However, it seems you're better with a blade and your taijutsu than I gave you credit for, but it is of no consequence. I've learned much just from this one fight, she admitted. The Raikage could only smirk, before he placed his two bloody kunai back in his robes, and pulled on the hilt of the kodaki latched onto his back, and gripped it defensively in front of him. Yugito looked at the new weapon apprehensively. She recalled seeing the same blade in the Raikage's office hanging behind his chair on the wall, but she never asked about the blade. She mentally cursed, wishing she had, when the slightly blue tint in the blade caused a small voice in the back of her head that she knew wasn't Azanami's scream for her to do anything to keep herself from being touched by the elegant and decorative-looking short sword. You're far too young to understand the subtleties of war. You are brash and impatient, the downsides of youth. The middle-aged man spoke up, before making a come motion with his free hand, taunting the Nibi container. But if you wish to K me, then I suggest you do better than to send mere puppets. He advised, mentally smirking when he heard a low but demonic hiss coming from the blonde. With a wave of her hand, all six men jumped at the Raikage, who simply smirked at his demise, before he closed his eyes in concentration, which didn't go unnoticed by Yugito. Time seemed to slow just then, as the men flew through the air towards their target, weapons ready to strike him the death blow. However, as they approached, something occurred that none would have expected. The blade he held began to glow a light blue, before small bolts of lightning danced across the glowing metal. Yugito saw this and her eyes widened in surprise before she jumped back just in time, since a second later a lightning bolt shot out of the tip of the kodaki and danced across the sky. It blinded Yugito, and completely incinerated everything within 20 yards of the Raikage's position, which included all six of Yugito's puppets and the now black grass. Yugito looked back to see the devastation the small sword caused and now understood why that voice warned her about it. Her stunned expression made the Raikage smirk. He hadn't used this blade in well over a decade, and almost forgot what it was like to see his enemy's expression after using it. Shocked, I see. He taunted with a chuckle. Many are after they see my Amano Hibana's divine spark powers. Quote. He continued, before he surveyed the blade in an appraising manner. You know the blade, Raijin, whom the Nadaime Hokage made famous when he was alive? He rhetorically asked. Every shinobi knew of that legendary blade. It was actually Kumo who gave it to him, after Fire Country won a particular battle against us well over 70 years ago. However, what no one but the previous Raikages, myself, and the blacksmith who forged it know is that the Raijin wasn't actually completed when it was given to the Nadaime. He explained, getting widened eyes from her. That being said, the completed form of the Raijin is now in my very hands, the Amano Hibana, the Sochi who surpassed the Tusan. Rather poetic, don't you think? He questioned, as tiny bolts continued to dance across the blade. Yugito was shocked at the Raikage's words, not only because of the story behind the blade, but because of the fact that it just became a very large problem for her. Granted, the solution was to simply get the sword away from him, but easier said than done, especially when it comes to a cage-level shinobi whom had a natural affinity to lighting and, if rumors were true, was close to mastering that particular element. Fortunately for her, all they were rumors at this point. After her initial shock, she schooled her features. I'll admit that that blade is impressive, she said, getting into a fighting stance. But it won't be the determining factor in this battle, and once I KO you it will be under a new master. She finished her voice, leaving yet again no bluff in the Raikage's mind, who frowned at her sheer stubbornness. If that is how you wish it to be. He began before hand sealing, as the ground underneath them began to rumble and tremor. Suten, Shinsui Furueru, water style, hydroquake. He shouted. Once the words left his lips, a large fissure breached the ground below Yugito, whom jumped up into the air lest she fall in the gorge. However, as she sailed back, a large column of water shot out from the fissure, torpedoing right towards her prone form. In response, she could only cross her arms in front of her defensively before the water set into her and then craned downwards right into the unbroken ground. The Raikage stopped his chakra from flowing into the jutsu, and the water stopped flowing from underground. He looked ahead, and had this not been a battle to the death, would have probably had an enjoyable laugh at seeing Yugito's sprawled out form in a submerged crater that had formed from the pressure of the water when it hit the ground. She was completely soaked from head to toe, and looked as pissed as the Nibi no Nekomata herself. I hate being wet, especially when it's cold water. Yugito mentally growled, as she began to pull herself up from the crater, her body and clothing deep of the water. She finally got out of the crater, and sighed in annoyance when she saw the Raikage just finished a set of hand seals. Suten, Suiruuben, water style, water dragon whip. He announced, with a happy smirk. Yugito's demonic senses picked up on sounds behind her, and she immediately jumped away on instinct. Luckily her instincts were right, because where she had just stood was a thin though noticeable deep gash in the earth. Yugito landed and looked back to see a large sphere of water floating in the sky above the crater, the water that had probably gathered from the small pool that was made when his Shinsui Furueru jutsu set her into the ground. She narrowed her eyes when she noticed that not only was the sphere of water not dropping after the attack, but it actually began to spin, which meant that the Raikage was still feeding it chakra. Her body tensed when the spinning increased, and soon shot out dozens of whips like tendrils of water at her. She ran from her spot as he used her flexibility and evasion tactics to dodge a majority of the whips, however she was hit several times, which healed quickly thanks to Izanami's chakra. After several minutes of the game of tag between her and the whips, as she had tried several times to charge both the Raikage, or the sphere of water, both ending in failure and some rather nasty impalements. I'll just have to take out the sphere from a distance, she thought while dodging several more whips. I would use this jutsu to just K him, but the bastard wouldn't fall for such a simple and direct attack. She finished before beginning to hand seal while somersaulting over more whips. Doten, Iwa Yado Kuzushi, Earth style, stone lodging destruction. She yelled, while skidding across the ground, needing the necessary time to concentrate, which jumping around didn't allow. The Raikage, who had a look of amusement on his face as he watched Yugito's acrobatics, while dodging his jutsu, turned slightly serious when she began sealing in retaliation and watched carefully to see what she would do. However, when she called out the attack, his eyebrows arched in curiosity. That jutsu could only work when rocks were broken up. And he had none around him to be attacked with. His eyes widened slightly at the answer that hit him. She was aiming for his jutsu, not him. Now the reason this surprised him at all was for the simple fact that the motto for many Kumo shinobi was, cut off the head and the body will fall. And with her being a Kumo shinobi for over a decade, he assumed that she would still be unconsciously following that mentality. But apparently those 3 years away changed her greatly, since she was going after the body instead of the head. He was roused from his thoughts when he saw dozens of shards of rock shoot out of the crater that was made earlier, punching through his jutsu, scattering the water enough for the jutsu to be forcefully cancelled. Feeling his jutsu end, he looked directly at where Yugito had been moments ago, but saw nothing, that is before he felt a presence behind him. He swiftly turned and saw Yugito, who now had a smirk on her own lips just before she finished handsealing again. Doten, Doryuden, Earth Dragon Projectile. She yelled. A large mud-shaped dragon head erupted from the still muddy earth right in front of the Raikage, whom had no chance to evade when multiple blasts of sticky mud fired from the dragon's mouth. After only moments of the jutsu being used, the lightning leader was completely engulfed by the mud, which was so thick by now thanks to the earth absorbing the water from before, he couldn't move quickly. This gave Yugito all the time in the world to handseal for her finishing jutsu. Raiten and Yamaten, Raikage, Lightning and Darkness style, Lightning Shadow. She yelled. In the sky above the clearing they were in, storm clouds quickly formed before thunder could be heard. Suddenly a bolt of lightning shot down from the rumbling clouds, as well as a lightning bolt shaped from her own shadow, both working their way to the incapacitated Raikage. Only seconds later did the two bolts collide on the mud lump, making a sizable explosion, as well as the now hardened mud to go flying off in all directions. Yugito looked at the scene impassively, knowing that the bastard that had ruined her life wouldn't have SD from something as simple as that. Unfortunately for her, she was right on the money on her assumption, because as the dust cloud began to dissipate, a silhouette could be seen, before the form of the Raikage was identified. However, what Yugito didn't count on that made her go wide-eyed is the fact that other than a large slash mark zigzagging its way across the chest plate of his armor, he seemed completely unaffected by her jutsu. A jutsu that not even Naruto all those years ago could keep from being hurt from. How? The Raikage himself couldn't help but laugh at not only Yugito's expression, but her question and tone. It seemed that she had underestimated him since this battle first begun. If there was another law in the shinobi world that all should follow, it was to never under any circumstances underestimate an enemy. Unfortunately for you, there are many objects within Kumo that only the Raikage may know about and even use. Another one of these objects is this ceremonial battle armor that I'm wearing that's been passed down from Raikage to Raikage. Although explaining more about an advantage I have over you in this battle would be rather foolish, would it not? I certainly didn't become Raikage for my idiocy, moral code, or naivety. He explained, as small lightning bolts coursed across the armor. Yugito just narrowed her eyes to assess at the man's words. She would be in trouble if every time she is about to finish him he'll pull out another weapon in his cage, only, arsenal. Speaking of which, the lightning flowing across the armor intrigued her, mainly because there have been no reports in the history of shinobi that described non-weapon shinobi gear to support any sort of chakra manipulation. However, the answer then hit her like a ton of bricks, as she put the pieces together and reshuffled the last few minutes of the fight. That armor isn't just for protection from weapons, it can actually absorb ninjutsu. She mused, though more in a way to confirm her own thoughts verbally. However, it seems that the armor can either only absorb Raiten jutsu, or can absorb the main elements but not the sub-elements or rare kinds such as my Yamaton. She deduced after remembering the jagged gash on his armor, that went along the route her black lightning would have traveled. The Raikage said nothing. Although that was answer enough for the younger shinobi, it at least meant she was partially right. The question now was to what extent the armor can absorb ninjutsu. The only problem with this are the options that I'm left with that will actually allow me to beat him. My main concern being that sword and how to get it away from him. She thought, while trying to think up plans, before one came to her which made her smile like the cat that ate the canary. Well, he did say that he hasn't had a chance to fully test out the style he taught me. So why don't I test it out for him? She concluded, remembering a conversation she and Naruto had when he was teaching her the style that implemented her long hair. Brave. The Raikage spoke up after noticing the smirk on her face. To smile in the face of your cur. He finished getting into the stance he had been using. Yugito, after registering his words, relaxed her body before falling into a rather peculiar fighting stance, one that actually made the Raikage smile, trying to hold back a laugh, wondering if she was trying to be funny in such a serious situation or not. Yugito was currently in a stance that would remind anyone of a rather inebriated person trying to stumble their way out of a bar. However, instead of the silly wobbling drunks would do, Yugito was moving with an odd grace that seemed almost supernatural. While her movements were erratic to say the least, she made it seem like the moves were actually a part of something bigger. Alone they looked like some drunken fools walk home. However, the longer she held the stance, the more noticeable it became that the moves weren't erratic at all but a deception to make the enemy believe that it was. The Raikage not only noticed the evolution in her movements, but also recalled a fighting style looking similar to the one she was using from the far west called Suken, drunken fist out of boxing. He had witnessed the power behind the deceptive fighting style during a trip in his Junin days. And while noticing the differences in her movements and the movements of the Suken, came to the conclusion that whatever style she was using wasn't one to take lightly despite the way she looked. Several minutes had passed with the Raikage staying in his stance and just watched Yugito dance across the grassy field, and soon found himself actually getting frustrated. Are you going to attack me or just dance there all day? He shouted, and grunted in anger when no response was given. Very well then. I will come to you, he warned, before disappearing from his spot. Yugito's body tensed when she felt his presence approaching, and her eyes took on a hard edge to them before he appeared in front of her, swiping his kodaki across her chest. However, Yugito merely bent backwards, letting the sword sail right over her midsection. She continued with her momentum and did a back flip on her hands, her feet kicking his elbow backwards, and when she landed on her feet she pushed off her hands and snapped her hen up. This motion caused her long ponytail to quickly lash out and the end of it to whip across his forearm, leaving a rather nasty and deep gash. She landed completely back to normal with the same grace she had been using while using this style, and had a giddy smirk on her lips. Meanwhile, the Raikage was nursing his new and rather bloody wound, looking at Yugito with awe and annoyance. Those two styles are so similar and yet so different. When that old monk used it, he never jumped away from his opponent. He relentlessly attacked when an opening occurred and dodged his opponent's strikes with erratic albeit impressive moves. She on the other hand seems to use the deception based upon that style while incorporating it in the one she is using. It's like she is dancing with her opponent, however those moves are hidden underneath her seemingly erratic movements, and she even uses her hair as a long-range weapon. He thought while trying to revise both styles to try to remember or figure out any weaknesses either one may possess that might help him beat her. Unfortunately for him, Yugito didn't give him ample enough time to study the styles since she attacked him. Their fight lasted a long time, mainly because neither could land a CSP Ling blow on the other. Yugito was only able to get superficial wounds like before on him since his armor protected many of the more important and debilitating areas she would have gone for otherwise. While the Raikage just couldn't seem to land any lethal blows, her fighting style, body type, and flexibility allowed her to get away from nearly every one of his attacks. Granted, he was still able to get her several times in the arms and legs and even one in the lower stomach. After a rather devastating and deviously planned kick in the stomach, Yugito was sent several yards away, both opponents glaring at each other while panting heavily and trying to nurse any wounds they could for the moment. This won't end with just a taijutsu match as I guessed, the Raikage thought while eyeing his old subordinate. And she is much stronger than I gave her credit for. I suppose I'm slightly a hypocrite in the sense of underestimating my opponent. He mentally chuckled before beginning to handseal, Yugito noticing this and jumped towards him. Raiten, Rakushindenshin, lightning style, telepathy, bolt. He shouted. Yugito was only a few yards away when out of the tip of his kodaki sprouted a lightning bolt that shot right at her. She quickly jumped out of the way, and continued towards her enemy, however right when she was about to strike him down she sensed something behind her and jumped away once again. When she landed she looked behind her and to her surprise saw that the bolt she had just dodged had somehow rounded about and shot towards her once more, and was now just floating right next to its summoner. You may as well give up now. No one has ever been able to escape this particular jutsu of mine. For you see, this bolt is being controlled by me, so it will follow whomever for however long it takes until it strikes the mess, and you are its target, my dear. He explained, before the bolt shot towards her again, making her jump away. Much to the delight of the Raikage, Yugito was now forced to play defensively because of the sheer speed of the lightning bolt. While she was about the same speed as it, meaning it couldn't hit her unless she made a mistake. It also meant that she couldn't cast a jutsu that required a lot of her concentration, and she couldn't go and attack the Raikage directly because the bolt would simply dissolve into the sword and be fired at her again. I need something to distract that bolt of his long enough for me to get to him, she thought, while racking her brain to figure out a way, before something finally came to her. Well, it may not be my specialty, but it certainly should get the job done, she concluded, before putting her fingers into an infamous cross shape. Kage Bushin no Jutsu, she called out before several dozen copies of her appeared surrounding the Raikage, each with the Nibi's chakra cloak. You think a bunch of clones can beat me? The Raikage shouted in amusement, before the lightning bolt veered back and began to destroy the clones without mercy. Yugito mentally smirked, before she ran towards him with her clones doing the same. The lightning bolt continued to destroy her clones, with him seeming to not notice the threat that was lurking behind his back, until it was too late, with Yugito was about to impale him with her clawed arm. However, her attack was cut short when she felt a hot, painful, burning sensation in the middle of her chest. She looked down for her eyes to only widen in shock, seeing the lightning bolt shooting from her chest cavity. She looked back up to see the smirking Raikage looking over his shoulder at her. Seems you underestimated me once again. Only this time you'll lose your life for your mistake. He spoke coldly, only seeing Yugito open her mouth before closing it. But don't worry, we'll take real good care of your car-san. I'll see to that personally, after all a cage does get lonely sometimes. He taunted, hoping to see one last look of her delicious hatred in her expression before she SS. The Raikage however never got that one final look he yearned for, because the next time Yugito opened her mouth something that surprised even the Raikage himself occurred. Yugito poofed into a cloud. This occurrence caused his body and senses to go into overdrive to locate his elusive opponent. You don't need to look for me so hard. A feminine voice taunted from behind him, making him spin on his heels and look on in shock at seeing Yugito behind him, whom just finished a set of hand seals. Doton, Dira, Earth Style, Earth Shaker. She shouted. As the jutsu's name implied, when she summoned it, the earth underneath their feet began to shake violently, as if an actual earthquake was occurring. Using the disorientating effects of the jutsu to her advantage, Yugito launched forward using chakra to her feet to keep her balance while on the tremoring ground. Unfortunately, the Raikage couldn't use his chakra to keep his balance and also keep his concentration on his current jutsu. With Yugito swiftly approaching, he had to make a choice between the jutsu or his balance. The answer to that being one of the easiest he ever had to make. The lightning quickly disappeared, and he concentrated enough chakra to his feet to launch himself off the ground right before Yugito could grab him. It seemed, however, that the Raikage failed to destroy all of her cage bushins, as well as not notice one's presence until he was already in the air and helpless. So as the middle-aged leader flew into the air, a clone of Yugito came barreling down from the sky towards him, and kicking him in the back, sending him right back to earth, and the waiting fists of his opponent. Knowing he could do nothing to stop his descent, he did the only thing he could. Noticing where he was going to land, he pointed a Manohabana in front of him, ready to ail Yugito should she choose to not move from his path. The seconds quickly passed, and the Raikage was only a moment away from landing, and ironically had a smirk on his face despite the fact. The reason being that he didn't think anyone would be stupid enough to stay in his landing way, especially when he had a sword poised and ready to K should anyone not move. His smirk, however, turned into one of confused horror when Yugito in fact didn't move from her position, and when he landed actually took the entire sword from tip to hilt into the left side of her chest, the position obviously showing that it punctured her lung, if her bloody coughs were indication enough. Though before the Raikage could get away, nor even question her about her choice to stay, he felt a pair of arms slide around his own from behind him, trapping them to his sides. He turned his head to see yet another Yugito with a smile on her face, before turning back once more to see nothing there. He looked around quickly, before seeing at the bottom of his vision something red. He finally looked down and noticed a large pool of blood, and his Amano-Habana lying on the ground. Chishio Bushin no Jutsu. Yugito's voice exclaimed in an almost seductive fashion in his ear, but he knew that seduction was the farthest thing from this woman's mind right now. He was about to comment, but felt her hands beginning to handseal again. Yamaton, Oni no Fungeki, Darkness Style, Demon's Fury, she said softly, before any and all shadows around the area began to move and pull away from the object they belonged with. The Raikage watched the jutsu work with a morbid sense of curiosity. The moment he lost his sword, he knew this was over. She had set him up right into this trap the moment he jumped into the air. With her face and more importantly her fangs right next to his jugular, and him having no more weapons after using them all during their long battle. To most shinobi, a cage included, the rate of survival was slim to none at this point, especially when your opponent is a very pissed off Jinchuriki. He watched as the shadows contorted and stretched, pulling towards a point only a yard in front of him. When all the shadows touched, they literally lifted off the ground and began to contort once again, and when they were finished the now singular shadow was in the shape of an old interrogation and T device called the rack. Are you really going to use something as primitive as this, your showmanship aside? He quipped, trying to buy himself some time to think of a way to get out of her grasp. Yugito's answer was to merely release him from her almost inhuman stranglehold. The moment he was free, he attempted to jump away and release one of his most powerful jutsu that he now wished he had used earlier in the fight. But like he said before, if you underestimate an opponent you'll lose more than just the battle. Quickly remembering a clan in Konoha who could control shadows like she could, he looked down and paled at seeing her shadow extended over his own, meaning that she controlled him. Primitive, hi. She agreed whimsically, taking several steps forward, causing him to do the same until he was standing right in front of the slab. But the old ways were sometimes the best. She finished with a hint of twisted mirth. After speaking, Yugito pushed the raikage who could do nothing, despite trying to constantly break the shadow, possession, onto his stomach onto the slab. Yugito then put her hands in a single seal, and the shadow seemed to bubble in response before the raikage began to scream and curse her when he began to literally sink into the slab. He was quickly submerged into the black slab, before a moment later it bubbled once again and outpoured the raikage, looking much different than before he went in. He was now lying on his back instead of his stomach. He was also stiesp down to only his underwear. His limbs were pulled outwards, each with a cuff at the wrists and ankles, as well as one on his forehead and end to prevent it from moving. His glare, that would normally make anyone from Kumo flinch, only caused Yugito to laugh, especially considering his current position. No need to be mad, Raikage-sama. She answered, her expression mocking him, before walking up to the slab, a sadistic grin on her lips which she put right next to his left ear. Because you'll be too busy screaming for mercy. She cooed, her voice still holding that same mirth, but now holding something much more dark and sinister beneath. Oh, I never took you for a girl who liked the rough stuff. He joked back at his double meaning, hoping to get her angry, forcing her to lose her concentration. Unfortunately for you, the rough stuff I'll be doing with you won't give any form of pleasure, for you anyway. She smirked evilly, before hand-sealing. Quote. Yamaton, Cage no Am, Darkness Style, Reign of Shadows. She said. Her own shadow began to twitch and move about before actually showing out from under her feet until it rested in front of her. She then performed another seal, which caused the shadow to bubble, and from the bubbles tendrils of the shadow began to float into the air. When the shadow was no longer on the ground, the hundreds of tendrils took on the shape of senbon needles which floated in the air, each end pointing at the raikage's nearly end form. What you're going to do? Me with senbons? He mocked, while having the audacity to laugh, before stopping shortly after and looked Yugito right in the eyes. You damn coward, don't even have the stomach to K someone with your own hands. It was no wonder why you were so easy to control. He continued, but before Yugito could respond went a step farther. Now I understand. Elena-san didn't adopt you because she loved you. She felt pity for you, felt sorry for you. She became your adopted parent out of pity, not love. She probably hated you just as much as the rest of the village did, and was simply biding her time. He finished, mentally smirking at succeeding with what he had wanted, when he saw Yugito's eyes flash sadness for a moment before quickly turning to one of rage. Her anger getting the better of her, Yugito opened her right hand, and her shadow quickly fused back, turning into a baseball-sized ball that now floated in her palm. She walked to the side of the slab he was strapped to, and with a smile that one could only associate with a demon looked right into the lightning leader's eyes, placing the shadow ball several inches from his exposed chest. Just a little closer, he thought while mentally laughing at her stupidity. As he said before, she was young and brash. If she were in his generation she'd have killed him immediately and be done with it. War was not a time nor a place for personal vendettas. Yugito leaned over and with her face mere inches his spoke to him for the last time. I'll make you suffer for every year you ruined my life and hurt my Car-san whom I know loves me. She answered him, while lowering the black ball slowly but surely towards him. With my own hands, she concluded with a tone of finality. Perfect, he thought, as a large grin couldn't help but show on his lips, as he began to initiate his plan now that the key player was in position. Yugito arched a brow at seeing the man's smile, and found it disturbing considering the fact she just told him she would tee him mercilessly. Something just didn't seem right to her as the pit of her stomach began doing flip-flops, but she didn't know why. Pushing the feeling to the back of her mind, she set back into getting the revenge she so richly deserved and pushed the ball the last few inches from his chest. Kitten, something isn't right here. Azanami, whom until then had stayed silent in this battle knowing that Yugito wished to fight it alone, voiced with concern etched into it. Yugito halted her jutsu once more, knowing full well that Azanami was far more in tune with their surroundings than she was, which caused the blonde to listen to her friend whenever a warning was given. I have the same feeling as Anami-chan, but it was just my jitters about finally getting the revenge I've wanted so long for. Yugito reasoned. Not hearing her friend respond for several moments took that as a sign to continue, which she did, shoving the ball the final inch. Stop! Azanami's cried out, her tone holding great worry and surprise, which caused Yugito to tense and her eyes to widen. Never had she known Azanami to be worried or scared of anything. Kitten, get away from him. Now, she shouted, finally figuring out what the Reikage was up to but not having enough time to explain it. Azanami-chan, what are you? Yugito began to argue, but then she noticed that the Reikage began to mouth something to her, the words making her go wide-eyed in both shock and confusion, especially when his body began to glow an ethereal white, and lightning bolts far too strong to be held within a human body begin to lash out from his very skin. Haijutsu, Reiku Habana, hidden technique, lightning spark. With the words he lipped to her. She immediately jumped back as her friend instructed, but it was too late. A singular enormous lightning bolt protruded from the Reikage's chest, shooting towards the sky, before it quickly expanded outwards, enveloping and transversely burning all it encompassed within a white-hot light. Yugito as well being unable to escape it fast enough. As the light continued its rampage on the landscape, a singular smoldering object could be seen being ejected from the still expanding light. The smoking object fell a good distance away from the light, its burning form being extinguished from the lack of extreme heat the light had provided. After several moments the object could finally be recognized as Ni Yugito, albeit only slightly thanks to the third-degree burns, and lack of clothing and hair. Yugito, who was still surprisingly conscious, was sprawled on her back while chewing on her lip to keep from screaming bloody M at the searing pain that racked her body, while Azanami tried her best to heal the worst wounds on her friend as quickly as possible. The light continued to expand for several long moments until its surface area extended at least 50 yards in every direction from the point of origin. By then much of Yugito's scarred skin had peeled off, revealing new red, sensitive but healthy skin, as well as her hair growing back already falling down to her en. She picked herself up, while still wincing from the remaining pain, and watched as the jutsu finally began to recede. Seeing this, she covered herself with her arms to save what little modesty she could, and trekked back towards the shrinking light to see what happened to her prey. The light reached its origin, with Yugito close behind, before it sunk back from the sky and then simply disappeared into the air, leaving the charred husk of the Reikage behind, which made Yugito gasp. The scarred and man heard the gasp and smiled despite himself, before facing his opponent. His entire body was just as bare as hers, only his skin wasn't reforming like hers. All his skin from head to toe was charred, making the once handsome man look unrecognizable now. When she looked back at his face, her eyes widened, noting that his lips were shrived almost to the point it didn't look like he had them anymore. His nose shrunk so much that people would question if he could even still breathe from it anymore. But his eyes were the worst. Instead of the light brown eyes he once had, the entire area was now simple clumps of yellowish green. It was obvious he would never see again. I should have guessed you'd have survived that, thanks to your prisoner I'm sure, but can't blame a guy for trying. He said, but his voice was drastically different because of the burns, there was a lisp, and the tone was much deeper. Why would you use such a jutsu that I'm sure you know this would be the end result? She questioned in a moment of uncharacteristic pity upon the person whom caused her so much grief. The Reikage grinned once again, or what she now guessed was the equivalent, before speaking. You had me at your mixie on that SS slab. Not only as the Reikage but also as a proud shinobi of Kumo, I could not allow you to do whatever you wished to me. SSSO, I asked my most powerful SSList jutsu to try to KU. Hi, sure I know this would be the result for me without wearing my armor, but we have great medics in Kumo SSSO. If I would have been found by them, I'd have regained at least 75% of what I lost. I may not have been Reikage any longer, but I'd have won our battle and taken out a key player in this war. Everything I've done has been done in the name of furthering Kumo's greatness. From becoming Reikage, putting the Nibi into you, training you while using your car SS-san as blackmail. And now this. My ultimate SS to get rid of Kumo's enemy. he retorted, his explanation actually making a small part of Yugito rethink her thoughts about just how evil this guy was, considering he SD himself like this all for his village. Though those thoughts were quickly quelled, when she saw an odd smirk grace his lips. But I also did this as my final act to SS spite you after all of your betrayals. Quote. He continued, his smirk growing even wider. Quote. USSC this jutsu magnifies all the bioelectricity in my body hundreds upon hundreds of times before it expels the energy as USS saw. But one of the SS side effects other than how USS see me now. And the most important pertaining to our little fight and your goal here, is that as the lightning ice expelled from my body it burns every SS single one of my pain receptors. Meaning that although my body is still feeling the effects of third-degree burns and SSSO much more, I can't feel a thing. Didn't you wonder why I wasn't screaming this entire time? ITSS is because I can't feel anything. SSSO you can't be granted your final retribution. He finished, before chuckling at just imagining what Yugito's reaction would be after hearing that the revenge had she waited so long for which was in her grasp, was now taken away just as swiftly. Yugito stared at the man that ruined her life as if she was just told her Car-san had SD. She didn't blink, she didn't move, hell if not for the fact her body screamed for it she probably wouldn't have continued breathing either at that moment. The moment that her ultimate revenge was stolen from her. I can't believe it, after all this time. She thought, her voice sounding slightly hysterical. Kitten calm down. Azanami tried to call out knowing that this was a critical time for Yugito. 2 decades I've waited for this moment. She continued on ignoring her friend's warning, her hands beginning to clench and unclench slowly. Quote. Kitten you need to calm down, you may not be able to hear the man scream in pain anymore, but you still control what life he has left. And he steals it from me. Her fists clenched faster and tighter. Quote. Kitten listen to me, you still hold his life in your hands. He stole Car-san and my vengeance from us. Her fist stayed clenched now and began to shake, drops of blood falling from her claws digging into her palms. Damn it Yugito listen to me. Azanami ordered, slightly panicked feeling the familiar pull of when Yugito calls upon her chakra. Unforgivable. The purple cloak began to swirl around her end form viciously, the increase of ki making the Raikage smirk once again, knowing he had hit a sore spot. ISSC you've gotten over your shock, he said in a mirthful tone, enjoying the fact that he could cause just that last bit of pain in the Kumo traitor before his end. Well let's see how SSS strong your resolve really ice. He dared, that smirk never leaving his lips. Unforgivable. Yugito's voice raged causing the ground under her to shake from the force in which she spoke, her right hand tensed as her elongated claws and demon cloak gleamed menacingly in the sun, before she disappeared from her spot only a small cloud of dust where she once stood. For a moment nothing occurred in the battlefield, only the sounds of the birds chirping, and the cool breeze being felt. Then the second Yugito's form was seen again, a sickening and bone-crushing sound echoed in the clearing. The reason for the sound being that at the moment Yugito's right arm was pushed straight through the Raikage's head up to her elbow with the rest of her arm impaled into the earth. Shattered bone, sped muscles, and brain matter now oozed around the impact. Yugito was breathing heavily, adrenaline still pumping in her veins, as a surreal expression was cast on her face. She seemed totally oblivious to the fact she just killed her most hated enemy, as his blood, and brain squished against her arm and between her fingers. Yugito. Azanami's voice called out with worry. Yugito's body tensed slightly at hearing her friend's voice, and her sense of reality seemed to jump back to her, as she finally took in all that occurred in the last few seconds. Noticing the charred body that laid limply across the earth, she quickly pulled her impaled arm back with her free arm making a very goopy squish sound, and an even louder one when the Raikage's upper body fell back on the ground smacking into the pool of blood that formed. Yugito just stared at the now nearly headless corpse, as she processed everything. As realization dawned on her, rage once again racked her tense body, as her fists clenched before she let out an inhuman roar towards the heavens. A roar which held all her anger and anguish towards the man's audacity to take away her revenge. As well as her hope and joy that despite what he had taken from her she was still able to end the life of the man whom tormented her for most of her life. As well as finally being free from him and all that simple fact encompassed. She let out her roars for several long minutes, allowing the pent-up emotions for over 2 decades to finally be released from her heart and soul. Kitten people are approaching. Azanami warned her friend, however her tone held no concern, so Yugito guessed they weren't hostiles. The demonic cloak receded from Yugito's still end form, when she turned around from the Raikage's corpse before several shinobi from Konoha's side appeared in front of her. She raised a growing curiosity when she easily recognized several of them as the Uzumaki family as well as her comrade Hana. The shocked expressions of the younger shinobi at the devastation they now saw quelled any questions they would have initially blurted out. You alright, Yugito? Hana questioned, not even flinching at the gore that surrounded her. Hi, but I could use some clothes. She responded in a monotone voice, still covering what little she could with her arms. At least he has good taste in women, Valios mused approvingly while barely hiding his leer at Yugito's bloody, but still gorgeous end form. Hana nodded and shuffled in the scroll pockets of her Junin vest before finding what she wanted and threw it to Yugito, who mouthed a, "Thank you," before unfurling it and changed into the clothes that were inside, with Valios and Kyoshiro giving her some privacy by turning around, though Valios's gaze lingered longer than appropriate. So what exactly happened here? Kushina spoke up after Yugito had finished changing, now wearing the same outfit Hana wore. I ked the Raikage, she answered bluntly, getting dumbfounded expressions from the younger shinobi. You're kidding. You ked the leader of Kumo, a cage-level shinobi, by yourself? Valios asked, clearly not believing her statement. I won't explain the situation to you, but you should know that because of what I am, King a cage-level shinobi isn't that far of a stretch. She shot back, her eyes glaring down at the eldest male Uzumaki. I believe you, however I think the army will want proof of his death, for the very least a morale boost for the troops. And at the most a complete surrender from Kumo in exchange for their leader's body. Kushina spoke up. Yugito merely nodded and pointed to the charred corpse with the hole through its head, getting several raised brows. That faceless, jerked, husk is the Raikage. Valios questioned, only getting another nod from the blonde. How can we be sure that it's even him? He is unrecognizable like that. Tsunade-sama can easily do a diagnostic check. Kushina counted for Yugito, before letting out a sigh. Very well, we'll take the body and get back so we can get it examined ASAP. Kage Bushin no Jutsu, Yugito said after making the infamous cross seal, as 2 more of her appeared running off to fetch the body. Everyone else nodded before turning and jumped away towards where they knew the rest of their army was. Hana, however, stayed behind, noticing that Yugito walked in the opposite direction they were supposed to be heading. Everything all right? She questioned to her blonde friend. Hi, just getting my spoils of war before someone else does. She answered cryptically. Yugito finally reached her destination and picked up the shining blue kodaki that the Raikage fought her with, and examined the blade, noting that it didn't have a single nick on the blade. A truly superb weapon. She smiled at her new toy, before turning around and showing it to Hana, who arched a brow and whistled impressed. Yugito smiled back before sliding the blade in the hem of her Junin pants on her lower back, before both she and Hana jumped away to catch up to the Uzumaki brood and clones. As the 2 rushed through the forest, hearing the clashes of battle all around them, their thoughts rolled back to their 3 comrades whom they left. Be careful, Anko-san, Natsumi-san. Naru-kun, they both thought, before clearing those thoughts away and increased the chakra to their feet to catch up. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.